Working in a morgue strips away any illusions you might have about death. It's not poetic, not tragic. It's a process. People think it's creepy, but it's not. It's quiet, sterile, and predictable. You clock in, you prep bodies, you clock out. Nothing follows you home. At least, that's what I used to believe. It started with a body. A man in his 60s found dead in his home. Natural causes, nothing out of the ordinary. As I prepped him for refrigeration, I noticed the marks. Faint bruises encircling both wrists, like someone had grabbed him and held on tight. Bruises aren't unusual. People fall, struggle, try to save themselves. But these marks were clean, deliberate, too uniform to be random. I made a note in the report and moved on. The next day, another body arrived. A woman, mid-30s, car accident. Same cemetery listed on the transfer papers. Same marks on her wrists. By the third body that week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every single one came from the same cemetery, and every single one had those marks. Always the wrists, always the same size. I mentioned it to my supervisor. He shrugged. Probably from whoever's handling the bodies, he said. Some people are rougher than they should be. Maybe he was right. Still, it stuck with me. Handling bruises wouldn't explain the consistency, the precision of the marks. But I wasn't about to make a fuss over something I couldn't prove. Until the night shift. I usually worked days, but we were short-staffed, and I didn't mind the extra pay. The morgue at night is different. Quieter, if that's possible. The kind of quiet that presses in on you. Around midnight, a body came in. Elderly woman, heart attack. I went through the usual routine, unzipping the bag and logging the transfer papers. That's when I saw the marks again. Fresh, dark bruises, like someone had gripped her wrists hard enough to break the skin. I stared at them for a long time. The pattern was the same, as if someone or something was leaving their signature behind. I don't know why I did it, but I picked up the phone and called the cemetery. A man answered after a few rings, his voice rough, like I'd woken him up. "Who handles the bodies before they're sent here?" I asked. "Just me," he said. "I'm the night guard." I could hear him breathing, slow and deliberate. I told him about the marks. He laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You think I'm doing something to them?" I didn't answer. "They're dead," he said. "They don't care how they're handled." I hung up, but his words stuck with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something he wasn't saying. The next night, I drove to the cemetery. I told myself it was just to clear my head, to prove that nothing unusual was going on. But deep down, I knew better. The place was deserted when I arrived, the gates slightly ajar. I parked outside and walked in, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Rows of headstones stretched out in every direction, their inscriptions worn and faded. I found the night guard's shack near the back of the cemetery. The door was unlocked, the inside empty. A desk, a chair, a few scattered papers. Nothing unusual. Then I saw the basement door. It was hidden behind a shelf, slightly ajar, with stairs leading down into the ground. I hesitated, but not for long. Whatever was going on here, I had to know. The air grew colder as I descended, the steps creaking under my weight. At the bottom was a small, dimly lit room. And that's when I saw them. Bodies. Not buried, not embalmed, just lying there, on tables and the floor. Their wrists bound, bruised. The same marks I'd seen on every body that had come through the morgue. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Then I heard footsteps behind me. The night guard stood at the top of the stairs, his face obscured by the dim light. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching. I don't know how I made it out of there. I don't remember running, or getting into my car, or driving home. I called the police the next morning. They investigated, but the basement was empty when they arrived. No bodies, no evidence. Just an empty room. The cemetery shut down a few weeks later. Financial issues, they said. The night guard disappeared, and no one seemed to care. I've thought about it every day since, about the marks, the bodies, the basement. about what the guard was doing to them and why. But most of all, I think about what he said on the phone that night. They're dead, they don't care. He was wrong. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section which city you are listening from and what your thoughts are in regards to the supernatural. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any of our stories. You'd think photographing cemeteries would be a peaceful gig. Quiet neighbors, lots of open space, and not a single soul asking, "Can you make me look thinner?" That's why I started doing it. Plus, it's surprisingly lucrative if you find the right buyer for artsy black and white shots of ivy-covered headstones. Romantic decay sells, or at least, it did before this. I was deep into a project documenting old cemeteries for a local historical society when I stumbled onto what I call the grave. It was a cloudy Tuesday, perfect lighting for moody photos, and I'd wandered into an overgrown section of the town cemetery, a place so old that even the angels on the headstones looked tired of waiting for Judgment Day. That's when I saw it, a small, unassuming grave marker covered in moss. The words, "Do not disturb," were chiseled into the stone. No name, no date, nothing else. Naturally, my first thought was, great marketing opportunity. Nothing grabs attention like a cryptic, slightly ominous adjacent inscription. I snapped a photo, just one. The angle was perfect, the lighting dramatic, the vibe unsettlingly perfect. Then I moved on. Or so I thought. That night I was going through my shots, sorting the gems from the disasters, when my editing software froze on that photo. Just that one. I clicked every button I could think of. Nothing. The whole screen locked up, forcing me to do a hard restart. When I reopened the software, I could scroll through every other image like butter. Except for that one. I'll admit, I laughed it off. Tech glitches are part of the job, right? I decided to delete the photo altogether, thinking it might fix the problem. Except the delete button didn't work. I even dragged it into the trash manually. Nothing. The file sat there, smug as hell, like, "Nope, I'm staying." The next day, things got weirder. First, it was small stuff. My camera bag wasn't where I'd left it. The fridge door was open when I swore I'd closed it. My cat, Milo, normally a statue of indifference, wouldn't stop staring at the dark corner of the living room, his tail twitching like he was about to launch into orbit. Then came the whispers. It was late. Around 1 a.m. I was editing photos in the dim glow of my desk lamp when I heard what sounded like a voice. Faint. Low. Like someone muttering from another room. "Hello?" I called, because I'm apparently the kind of idiot who talks to intruders instead of calling the cops. No response. I figured it was nothing. Maybe the pipes or the wind or one of those random noises that makes you question your sanity at night. But then it happened again, and again. Each time it sounded closer. I checked every inch of my apartment. Doors locked, windows shut. No sign of anything or anyone. I was officially creeped out, but I told myself it was probably sleep deprivation. Happens to the best of us. That's when I noticed the photo. It was back on my screen. I hadn't opened it, hadn't clicked on it, hadn't touched it, but there it was, staring back at me like it had something to prove. And I swear, the angle had changed. It wasn't the same shot I'd taken. The gravestone looked off, slightly tilted. I shut my laptop so fast I nearly broke it. The next morning, I decided enough was enough. I printed the photo, figuring I'd take it to the Historical Society and ask if they knew anything about the grave. Maybe it was a weird art installation or a prank. Either way, I needed answers. The printer jammed halfway through. I tugged the paper out, and that's when I saw it. Faint smudges like fingerprints pressed into the ink. My hands were clean. No one else had touched it. By this point, I wasn't laughing anymore. I drove to the cemetery, determined to find the grave again. Maybe I could, apologize? Take another photo and leave it as an offering? My plan wasn't great, but I had to try something. When I got there, the grave was gone. Not vandalized, not moved, just gone. The grass where it had been was pristine, as if no one had ever been buried there. I checked the surrounding area, thinking I'd made a mistake, but no. It was the right spot. I even checked the photo again on my camera. Same location, same trees, same damn grave. And then, just as I was about to leave, I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. Cold, heavy. I whipped around, but no one was there. That was 3 days ago. The photo is still on my laptop. I've tried everything. Wiping the hard drive, smashing the SD card, even deleting the software. Nothing works. Last night, the whispers started again. Only this time, they weren't just muttering, they were laughing. And this morning, the grave's inscription was on my bathroom mirror, written in something that looked suspiciously like dirt. Do not disturb. Message received. But I'm starting to think it's too late. I don't consider myself a sentimental person, and working at a cemetery has only sharpened that edge. People come here to mourn or pray, hoping for closure, but all I see is a job that needs doing. Graves get overgrown, headstones crumble, crypts fall into disrepair. Someone has to keep the dead in their place, and that someone happens to be me. So, when the supervisor told us to clean out one of the old family crypts, I didn't ask why. I didn't ask anything. Orders are orders, and frankly, I'd rather scrub bird droppings off marble than deal with grieving families. The crypt in question had been sealed for decades, maybe longer. The family it belonged to didn't visit anymore, assuming any of them were still alive. The stone door was heavy, but we pried it open with crowbars and some muscle. Behind it was the scent of stagnant air and decay, familiar but worse. It clung to the back of my throat, sharp and earthy. One of the guys gagged. I didn't. Inside, the crypt was surprisingly intact. The coffins were stacked neatly in their slots, each with a brass plate marking who they belonged to. Dust and cobwebs draped over everything like some theatrical set dressing. Typical, but something felt wrong. The coffins weren't secured. Normally, old crypts like this have their lids bolted or sealed in place. But these were just there, loose, like someone had left them that way. We started clearing the place out, moving debris and cataloging the names on the plates for the records. It was boring, tedious work, the kind that makes you wonder if you've wasted your life. That was when we noticed the coffin at the back. It was different, older, heavier, and wrapped in rusted chains. Not just one or two chains either. There were dozens, crisscrossing the wood like someone had gone out of their way to make sure it stayed shut. "Why chain a coffin?" someone asked. No one answered. I don't care for theatrics or speculation, so I grabbed the bolt cutters and went to work. The metal gave way with loud snaps, the sound echoing in the small space. One of the others protested. Something about leaving it alone. But they didn't stop me. People like to talk, but no one wants to take the risk of looking scared. When the last chain fell away, we lifted the lid. That's when I saw the scratches. The inside of the coffin lid was lined with deep gouges, like someone had clawed at it desperately, trying to escape. The wood was splintered and torn, and the marks were uneven, frantic. There were also stains, dark, uneven streaks that had long since dried. Blood. The coffin held a skeleton, half collapsed and brittle with age. The jaw was tilted, as if it had died mid-scream. Around the remains was a bundle of papers, yellowed and brittle. Journals, bound with string. I picked one up. The first page was covered in neat, slanted handwriting. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. They buried me alive. I'll admit, that gave me pause. The others started murmuring, but I ignored them, flipping through the pages. The writer, whoever they were, had been a member of the family. They claimed to have been locked in the coffin after being accused of some unspecified crime. Witchcraft, maybe, or something worse. The details were vague, but the fear was clear. The entries grew more frantic as they went on, describing the suffocation, the hunger, the darkness. But there was something else. They wrote about changing. It hurts. My skin burns. My bones crack. I am not myself anymore. I don't believe in ghosts or curses, but there was a desperation in those words that didn't sit right with me. I tossed the journal aside and turned to leave. That's when the lights went out. We had work lamps set up, but they all cut out at once. The air felt heavier, like the room had grown smaller. Someone yelled, stumbling over debris, but I stayed still. Moving blindly in the dark is how you get hurt. Or worse. Then I heard it. A sound that wasn't human. It started low, almost like a growl, but deeper. Wet. I thought it was the others, panicking, but then it grew louder. It came from the coffin. The one we'd opened? A hand shot out. Thin, bone white, with fingers that looked too long to belong to anything natural. It clawed at the edge of the coffin, pulling. We ran. I didn't look back. I don't care what anyone says. There's no bravery in facing something you don't understand. When we got outside, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows over the cemetery. No one spoke. We just left the crypt open, chains lying in a heap on the floor, and walked away. The supervisor asked us the next day why we didn't finish the job. I told him to send someone else. He did. I haven't seen those workers since. Working the midnight shift at the morgue isn't for everyone, but I've never minded it. The pay is decent, and the solitude suits me. The living are exhausting, but the dead, they're predictable. No surprises, no demands, no drama. At least that's how it used to be. It was a Tuesday or maybe a Wednesday, it doesn't matter. The days blur together on this shift. It was just after 2 a.m. and I was finishing up some routine paperwork when I heard the delivery bay buzzer. That alone was unusual. Midnight deliveries aren't part of the protocol. I made my way to the bay, expecting maybe a mistake or a late transfer. Instead, I found a single coffin waiting for me. Small, unmarked, and out of place. No accompanying paperwork, no transport vehicle in sight. Just the coffin sitting there as if it had been dropped off by a ghost. I considered leaving it outside. No paperwork means no responsibility, and I didn't want the hassle, but leaving it there felt wrong. Against my better judgment, I wheeled it inside and secured it in the cold storage room. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning, let the day crew sort it out, but something about it nagged at me, like an itch I couldn't quite reach. After a few hours of trying to ignore it, I gave in and went back to the storage room. The coffin was smaller than most, child-sized. I don't have kids and I don't feel much about them one way or the other, but seeing a coffin that small always does something to you. The lid wasn't nailed down, so I opened it. I wanted to see what I was dealing with. Maybe it would give me some clue about where it came from. Inside was a child. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, with porcelain-like skin and a face so serene it could have been carved from marble. Her eyes were closed, her hands folded neatly over her chest. She looked perfect, too perfect. There was no sign of decay, no discoloration, no bloating. Nothing to suggest she was anything other than asleep. But she wasn't breathing, and her skin was cold to the touch. I closed the lid and stepped back, feeling an unease I couldn't explain. I'm not one to get spooked easily, but something about that coffin, about her, felt off. That's when the phone rang. I didn't expect a call. The morgue doesn't get many, especially not at that hour. I let it ring a few times before picking up. Hello? There was silence on the other end. Then, faintly, I heard a child's voice. When will you bring me home? The words were soft, almost sing-song, like she was asking about something simple. But there was no innocence in the tone, just a calm, unwavering expectation. I didn't answer, I just hung up. I told myself it was a prank. Someone playing games. Maybe one of the guys on the day shift thought it'd be funny to mess with me. But as I stood there, staring at the phone, it rang again. When will you bring me home? The same voice, the same question. I slammed the phone down and walked out of the office. I needed a moment to think, to breathe. But as I passed by the storage room, I heard it. A tapping, soft, rhythmic, coming from inside the room. I stopped, hand hovering over the doorknob. I knew I shouldn't open it. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to know, but something pulled me forward. Call it instinct, call it stupidity. I opened the door. The coffin lid was off. The child's body was still inside, exactly as I'd left it, but the lid was propped neatly against the wall. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to piece together what I was seeing. Nothing made sense. The phone rang again. When will you bring me home? I left. I didn't bother locking up, didn't clock out, didn't even grab my jacket. I got in my car and drove, not caring where I was going as long as it was far away. The next morning, I called in sick. When I finally worked up the nerve to go back, the coffin was gone. No one on the day shift knew anything about it, and there was no record of a delivery. It was like it had never been there. But the phone calls didn't stop. They come at odd hours, always from an untraceable number. And it's always the same voice, asking the same question. When will you bring me home? I don't answer anymore. I don't think I could, even if I wanted to. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear that same soft tapping. It's been over 2 decades since I last stepped into a morgue. The first time I noticed the gap in the logs, I assumed it was a technical glitch. The clock on the system skipped 2 hours during my shift. At 11:43 p.m., I was signing off on an incoming body. At 1:47 a.m., the next log showed me sealing the same body into the cold storage drawer. I didn't remember losing time. I was tired, sure, but I'd never blanked out on the job before. Still, I shrugged it off. A clerical error, maybe. Or a minor system crash. Things like that happen. The second time was harder to ignore. A week later, I was working another solo night shift when I noticed a similar gap in the system. 2 hours gone. The timestamps showed I'd completed the usual procedures, but I had no memory of it. The strange part? Both gaps involved the same body. A John Doe who'd been found near the outskirts of town. Unidentifiable. No next of kin. The coroner's report had been straightforward. Cause of death, a massive heart attack. The guy was middle-aged, average build, no distinguishing features except for an unusual scar running down his chest. It almost looked surgical, but it wasn't listed in the autopsy. I decided to check the security footage. I needed to know if I'd just been zoning out or if something else was going on. I told myself it was just to confirm a technical error, nothing more. The footage was unsettling. At first, it showed me going through the usual motions, wheeling the body into the prep room, setting up my tools. But then my movements changed. They became stiff, mechanical. I stood still for long stretches, staring at the body as though waiting for something. At one point, I moved to the other side of the room, out of the camera's view. When I returned, I was holding something small, metallic. But the angle didn't give me a clear look at it. Then came the strangest part. I leaned over the body and whispered something. My mouth moved, forming words, but there was no audio on the footage. Whatever I was saying, I looked focused, almost reverent. I watched the rest of the footage, waiting for a logical explanation, but none came. When the gap ended, I was sealing the body in its drawer, my movements suddenly normal again. I didn't sleep that day. The next night, I went back to work, uneasy but determined not to let it get to me. I told myself I'd stay hyper-aware, double-check the logs, and avoid letting my mind wander. But by 3 a.m., it had happened again. This time, I knew something was wrong. I reviewed the footage immediately. The pattern was the same. Normal routine, then those mechanical movements. But this time I noticed something new. When I stepped out of view to retrieve the metallic object, I left the door to the cold storage drawer open. The body was sitting up. It didn't move much, just enough to make me doubt what I was seeing. But it was upright, head tilted slightly toward the camera, as though it was watching me. I rewound the footage, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light or a glitch in the recording. But every time I watched it, the body moved the same way. Slowly, deliberately. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Hey, my own morgue logs show I've been losing hours of time. And also dead bodies are sitting up and watching me work. Instead, I made a decision. I was going to stay awake through the entire shift. No breaks, no distractions. I needed to know what was happening during those missing hours. That night, I propped my phone on the desk with the camera recording. If something happened, I'd catch it live. I kept a steady stream of coffee going, pacing the room whenever I felt even a little tired. But no matter how hard I tried, at some point, I blinked, and everything went blank. When I came to, the cold storage drawer was open. The body was lying on the prep table again, exactly as it had been the first night. My hands were coated in something slick and dark. It wasn't blood, not exactly. It had a strange, tar-like consistency and smelled faintly metallic. The phone was still recording. My heart pounded as I picked it up and played back the footage. I watched myself walk to the cold storage drawer, open it, and pull the body out. I didn't hesitate. My movements were deliberate, almost practiced. Then, I leaned over the body and whispered something again. Only this time, the camera picked up the faintest sound. It was my voice, saying the same phrase, over and over. "I will bring you back." The footage ended abruptly, and I sat there, staring at the black screen, unable to move. The next day, I quit. I don't know what happened during those missing hours. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear the faint sound of those words echoing in my mind. "I will bring you back."